and welcome to World Insight, coming to you live from Beijing on CCTV News. I'm your host, Geun-hye. On today's program, scandal engulfs the South Korean President Park Geun-hye has offered to resign, but with a catch. Opposition groups are not buying it. And a recount of the recent U.S. elections looks more likely, with Wisconsin agreeing to the Green Party's request. But can it upset the outcome? And we start today's show with the political situation in South Korea. Weeks of protests did little to pressure President Park Geun-hye into stepping down. But now that she is singing a very different tune. Speech, Park said that she's willing to resign early and let Parliament decide her fate.
저는 제 대통령직 임기.
I will let Parliament decide everything about my future, including the shortening of my term. I will step down from my position according to the law once a way is found to pass on the administration in a stable manner that will minimize political unrest and vacuum after ruling and opposition party's decision.
However, the opposition sees the announcement as a last-ditch attempt to avoid impeachment. Park made the comments in her third televised address ahead of a parliamentary vote on whether to impeach her over the scandal involving her friend Choi Soon-sil. If Parliament does pass the motion, Park will immediately be suspended, and her prime minister will take over as an interim head of government. And on the South Korean political scandal, we earlier talked to our correspondent in Seoul, Geun-hye. He told us the possible scenarios following President Park's statement on resignation. Listen.
Following the latest developments, really the ball is in the National Assembly's court now, where the president doesn't look like she's resigning anytime soon. She wants that decision to be made through the National Assembly. Now, prior to Tuesday's address, what many had thought was that lawmakers would push this impeachment motion through the National Assembly as soon as possible. Now, lawmakers are they're up to the decision now to discuss and battle really what measures they do have. And if impeachment is not on the table, then any measure or legal measure to try and shortcut her presidency or her term would have to be through a constitutional amendment, and that could take months as well. So really, there isn't much certainty on what would happen next, but what we do know is that the president still has very low approval ratings, and we're going to continue to see protests weekly here in the heart of central Seoul, at least.
Geun-hye, that's our correspondent in Seoul, South Korea. Before we move on to our discussion with the panel, take a look at how the Choi Gate scandal has developed over the past month.
Chanting and waving placards, about 1.5 million protesters turned out in Seoul, and another 400,000 gathered in other regions over the weekend. 5 weeks of protests called for Park Geun-hye to leave office. She's in the middle of a political storm over allegations a close confidant, Choi Soon-sil, exploited her close relations with the president to line her pockets and the foundations she controls. The scandal broke last month when JTBC had found an abandoned tablet device which belongs to Choi, showing she engaged in peddling influence.
최순실 씨는 과거 제가 어려움을 겪을 때 도와준 인연으로
President Park apologized to the nation soon after that, but denied any wrongdoing. After Choi's arrest, more information came out which brought to light allegations of cult activities and leaks of classified information. Park reshuffled her cabinet to ease the brewing political tension, but it did little to shore up her falling approval rating. The president made a public apology again and vowed to cooperate with an investigation. However, when the prosecutor knocked on her door, Park's lawyer said she was too busy to explain her relationship with Choi Soon-sil. Will Park's resignation be the end of the political crisis?
Well, that is a great question. For more discussion on that, South Korea's political scandal, we are joined here in Beijing studio, Mr. Yang Xi-yu, Senior Fellow with the China Institute of International Studies. In Washington, D.C., Yun-jung Lim, a lecturer of Korea Studies at Johns Hopkins University of Advanced International Studies. And in Medford, Massachusetts, we have Song-young Lee, Kim Koo Korea Foundation Professor of Korean Studies at the Fletcher School at Tufts University. Welcome to the three of you. First of all, may I ask for your opinion, Ms. Lim, what is this? I mean, President Park suggesting let the parliament decide my fate. If parliament agrees, I will resign. Is she trying to buy time? Is she trying to avoid disgrace of impeachment? Or is she really serious about a smooth political transition?
Yes, it's a very difficult, tough question, but it looks like the timing was the main issue. As many of us already know, the National Assembly was almost about to move to the impeachment of the president on this Friday, December 2nd, almost at the December 9th. So it was, and the opposition parties already agreed on their draft too. So it was again almost about to do that. So I think President Park and her supporter they look like they don't want to completely lose their fame or the honor. So again, I do think the timing was critical.
Critical, Professor Lee. Though the Parliament can still impeach her, can't it?
Absolutely. With each apology, the latest being her third, the balance of power, the sway of forces continue to drift away from the president and toward the public. President Park comes across as disingenuous. It's been revealed that she has made false statements, lies, has overturned her statement, her decision to accept interrogation by the state prosecutor's office. Now she says she doesn't have the time for that and so forth. So this latest apology, while sounding on the surface a bit dramatic, I will be willing to resign, it really puts the onus on the parliament, on the National Assembly, which is not functioning at a high level. She wants the National Assembly to come up with a timetable and legal procedures for her to step down. Stepping down would be less ignoble way to exit the political stage than being impeached. However, it's unlikely that the National Assembly will be able to come up with such a plausible plan anytime soon, and she knows it.
But Ms. Lim, knowing her possible tactics, as both of you indicated, then the parliament could still go ahead and order the so-called impeachment of her coming Friday or in the near future, can't it?
Yeah, it looks like, again, opposition leaders already explicitly said that this is a kind of trap made by the President Park, because it's already, we do see kind of, split, cleavage kind of thing within the ruling party, especially within the group, so-called non-Park group, who are not actually political supporters of President Park. So we already are observing kind of, split situations, even within the ruling party, so which is absolutely concerned by the oppositions, because without some votes, some certain numbers of votes from the ruling party, they cannot push forward the impeachment. So, but still, it looks like opposition leaders are pretty decisive and very determined to push forward the impeachment process.
Mr. Yang, it seems that this gesture coming from President Park is not only going to create chaos within the Blue House, where she is staying, demonstrated against by the public outside it, but also create a chaos within the parliament itself.
Oh, yes.
The ruling party, the opposition party sometimes do not agree with one another. Even within the opposition party, they cannot come up with a, supposed to be candidate against the President Park.
Yeah.
So where is this chaos of South Korean politics going?
Well, with uncertain direction and uncertain results, actually, President Park, by the announcement, opened a so-called third path for her step down.
Right.
Legally speaking, there's only two ways or two choices: resignation or impeachment. And her announcement reflects her opposition to both resignation and impeachment. She kicked the ball at the parliament for, I agree with Ms. Lin say, for her honor or faith.
So my question really is, knowing possibly that's her tactic, what would that mean for politics as a whole in South Korea?
Well, it's an uncertain situation ahead. Number one, no one can predict whether or not the impeachment process can continue. And number two, more importantly, after the step down, no matter with what format, what will be the next power person who control and manage the mess situation in South Korea?
Do we have another plan, Professor Lee, possibilities? For example, some are already talking about changing the constitution to make sure the term of a president will not be 5 years, which President Park is enjoying right now, but rather 4 years, so she could step down as soon as possible. But of course, that requires, first of all, half of the parliament to vote yes, and then for the second round, 2/3. That's difficult as well. But is there another possibility?
There is no legal, moral, political reason barring President Park from stepping down right now, today. In fact, I would say there are compelling moral, political, legal reasons for her to step down as soon as possible. When your approval rating is around 4%, you have already lost your mandate, your authority to govern. President Park is the laughingstock of the South Korean public, and public opinion is the foundation of any regime, any government, whether the most military and despotic or the most liberal and free. So she needs to step down. Now, the impeachment process is a bit convoluted. The parliament is likely to impeach the president. I think it can get the 2/3 majority needed to impeach her. Yet, at the same time, that just means she'll be suspended. And in the meantime, her figurehead appointee, Prime Minister, will be the acting president while the nation's constitutional court deliberates the impeachment process. 6 out of 9 judges need to ratify, need to agree to impeach her, and then she needs to step down. So we are still a long way from a satisfactory resolution to this growing crisis, and the simplest and the most honorable way for her would be to step down as soon as possible.
Right. Having said that, though, Ms. Lim, there is another important question needs to be asked. That is, under what circumstances President Park will not be immune anymore from prosecution or from investigation? Now she could still say to the investigators, you know, I don't have the time. Sorry, I can't accept your questions. But if she agrees to step down, or if she will be quote-unquote impeached in the near future, will she still be immune to investigations and to questioning? I think that is also a very important question that needs to be asked right now. Ms. Lim.
Yes, it's an important question, but still things are very fluid. Opposition party, they recommended 2 prosecutors as the head of the special prosecution who will be in charge of investigating this scandal. But even the special prosecution is launched, it can take like 90 days or at longest like 120 days. And as long as the president is still sitting or in the office, the South Korean president has some immunity, except some cases related to the internal and the external troubles. So there are so many different conflicting interpretations of what the internal and external troubles are, and some more like radical opponents will say that this is obviously a internal trouble, which means she doesn't deserve any the kind of immunity anymore. But again, things are so fluid, and as in terms of process too, even the special prosecution takes even longer than we actually expect.
Having said that, though, Mr. Yang here in Beijing, we are all observing what's going on in South Korea from afar. Yet the question and the impact for everybody else in the neighborhood is, who is now governing South Korea? What if there are emergencies? What if there are issues that countries need to bring to South Korea to resolve together? Mr. Yang, what is your assessment? Who is really running the country right now? Obviously, the president is sitting in the Blue House. They're not even to come out.
Well, it's a very fundamental question, challenge facing the South Korea as a whole nation. For observer externally, I think no person who is in charge of the country for governance now effectively. And legally speaking, Park remains the president.
That's right.
But everyone knows that she cannot perform as a
She's
president.
lame duck already.
And the more important question is, what will be the next for the situation? Who will be the next who control the
Before we
country?
worry about next, let's worry about reality right now, Professor Yang. I want to go to you, Professor Lee, in the U.S. There are a lot of issues going on in the neighborhood. DPRK is still developing its nuclear program, not to mention that. But also, China, for example, one of the most important neighbors of South Korea, has concerns about South Korea, Japan having intelligence sharing agreement. China also has concerns about employment of SAT system inside South Korea. Obviously, that's a thing that's still continuing to be implemented at this moment. So the question is, when China has concerns, who should China talk to? And where should China voice its concerns to? And will South Korea use the chaos politically inside the country as an excuse for its political instability and also irresponsibility?
The South Korean political crisis has serious foreign policy implications. If I may just briefly touch upon the crux of the issue, compared to her predecessors, Park Geun-hye's alleged crimes and transgressions are, in terms of the degree of criminality, not nearly as serious as some of previous transgressions like massacring civilians, graft in the hundreds of millions of dollars, election rigging, and so forth. Yet the problem here is there is no plausible deniability, pardon me. It is now abundantly clear that Park Geun-hye has been at the center of influence peddling, extorting tens of millions of dollars from biggest companies in South Korea and so forth. And this has a palpable resonance along generational lines of South Korean socio-economic lines. The public opinion has turned against her. She must step down. In this political chaos, North Korea is most likely to test the South Korean streets and resort to another provocation. It is a time of leadership change in the United States. North Korea now is on the eve of the 5th anniversary of the death of Kim Jong-il, the current leader's father. So North Korea has an incentive to mark this occasion with a bang, with a weapons test and so forth. And that will strain the alliance. That will have implications on South Korea's relations with China, Japan, and the United States. So it's a good time, opportune time for North Korea to take advantage of this political vacuum and instability.
Professor Lee, of course, politely talk about the issue more for the whole region, which is DPRK, but there are issues between South Korea and China. For example, about that system, about South Korea cooperation with Japan, intelligence sharing when it comes to military cooperations. These are big concerns for China. So, Mr. Yang, what is the way out? I mean, who could China talk to now?
Well, both negative things and positive things, we have no partner. For example, another example, you mentioned two examples. Another example is we are going to have a trilateral leaders meeting among Japan and South Korea for good things, cooperation. But, you know, we have no partners from South Korea's side. Only Japan and China are.
So the question is, Mr. Yang, should China just sit here on its hands, watching what's going on in South Korea, and see all the concerns are not being addressed from the Chinese side?
Yeah, we have no any other better choice else. We have to wait and see who will be the next, what will be the next happen. So that's the question, not only for South Korea, but also for China and other country else.
Of course, Ms. Lim, China respects the process of democracy inside South Korea. It's internal affairs. China never want to interfere, but issues is not just within the border, it's also spilling over the border. So once again, this very important question, strategic issues, very important steps taken by South Korea at the moment of political crisis when it comes to foreign policy. So who should be responsible for now? Actions being taken now, particularly when you look at the near future. Ms. Lim.
Again, I don't have a clear answer to, unfortunately, to that question, because that's pretty true. We do see a power vacuum situations in the middle of the country. But the important thing I really want to emphasize is South Korea is a liberal democracy, as I emphasized several times already, which means it does have a check and balance system. Even though president is in that situation, National Assembly is working, and every citizen is working in their his or her own position. That is why we don't see any serious trouble at this moment, and I don't think we will see another serious trouble within the country.
Right.
Of course, I do hear your voice, concerned voice about the foreign affairs. It might take time to adjust everything, but again, the final comment I need to address is, again, it will get back soon. I mean, the whole country will get back on the track.
Very important points. Before we go, one final important point, particularly concerning the near future, that is, will the opposition parties, together with the so-called non-park group within the ruling party, be able to come up with somebody or some candidates for future presidential position? If impeachment go ahead, if President Park resigns also. Professor Lee, who are the names that might be jumping right in front of us? What are these people? Are they capable? Should they be trusted? Professor Lee, from your perspective.
Well, two of Park Geun-hye's political opponents from the previous election campaign in 2012, Moon Jae-in and An Chol-soo, are leading candidates. It really is, the next election is their race to lose. There is another potential candidate, very strong, Pan Ki-moon, the outgoing UN Secretary General. However, because the opposition is a bit in disarray, because individuals have their own personal gains in mind, the opposition party is not really united in coming up with an effective plan to dethrone Park Geun-hye at this moment.
Right. Before we go, final words from you, Ms. Lim. We all understand there is a military strategy called divide and rule. Obviously, President Park already divided further the political chaos inside the country. So exactly who's going to be the potential ruler, quote unquote? Briefly.
It's again, I don't have a clear answer because everything is so fluid, and as Professor Lee mentioned, there are some, plausible candidates in both parties. So we'll have to pay attention to. Think.
Things are changing momentarily, all at the same time. So we're looking forward to see some result, at least for the coming days, if not weeks. Thank you so much for being with us, Sam-Yong Lee, Yoon-Jang Lim, and Yang Shi-yu. Really appreciate it for being with us. Thank you. You're watching World Insight with me, Tian Wei. Still to come on our program. An election recount to dump the Trump. The Green Party gains ground in achieving recounts in 3 battleground states. Will it change the outcome of the U.S. presidential election? You're watching World Insight, coming to you live from Beijing, Monday to Friday, every day on CCTV News. Party nominee Jill Stein has launched a recount effort in the 3 swing states of Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania. While Wisconsin agreed, officials from Pennsylvania say Stein missed the recount deadline. Meanwhile, Stein has filed a lawsuit for a full recount in Pennsylvania. The move, bashed by President-elect Donald Trump, could reverse the result of the 2016 presidential election if Clinton turns out to be the winner of the 3 states. But the chances of this are very slim.
The U.S. election was nearly 3 weeks ago, but now a minor party has launched a recount effort in 3 key swing states: Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania. Jill Stein was the Green Party nominee for president and only received about 1% of the vote nationwide.
We are standing up As a grassroots campaign and a grassroots movement, we are standing up for a voting system that we deserve, that we can have confidence in, that has integrity and security.
The Green Party says the effort is meant to account for irregularities from potential hacking and other vote tampering, but they have presented no evidence of wrongdoing.
I want to be clear. There is no smoking gun. There is not something that we're pointing to say that this is wrong in Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. What we are saying is that there's enough peripheral evidence to warrant that our system should be investigated.
Votes are still being tallied in many states, and Hillary Clinton leads the popular vote count by about 2.2 million votes. But the U.S. election is determined by electoral votes allocated by winning individual states. Donald Trump leads the Electoral College count. Vote tallies in Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania are close, and if all three states shifted to Clinton, she would win the election. The Clinton campaign has now joined the recount effort, but there's very little chance it will actually change the outcome of the election. Donald Trump responded with a series of tweets bashing the recount effort, while his campaign accused Clinton of being a sore loser.
She congratulated him and she conceded to him on election night. I was right there. And the idea that we are going to drag this out now, where the president-elect has been unanimous to the Clintons and to the Obamas, is pretty incredible.
Later, Trump called into question the legitimacy of the popular vote, tweeting, "In addition to winning the Electoral College in a landslide, I won the popular vote if you deduct the millions of people who voted illegally." But there's no evidence of any large-scale voter fraud, and Trump provided no information backing up this claim. Jim Spellman, Washington.
And for more on the U.S. presidential election vote recount, we have in Iowa Timothy Hagel, professor of political science at the University of Iowa and Washington, D.C. We are having Mr. Robert Moran, a partner with the global advisory firm Brunswick Group. Gentlemen, good to see you again. I thought it would take me a while before I see you again, but you know, quite soon. So recount, how much there is the chance that things will be different. I mean, the result of the election will be different. Professor Hagel.
I think there's very little chance that this is going to make a change. I think there's a possibility when you have a closer state like Michigan where the difference was only about 10,000 votes, that it's possible that that could change, although it's not likely. But usually when you have recounts, the difference is maybe a couple hundred, maybe as many as 1,000 or two, but 10,000 is a lot. And then, of course, in Wisconsin, the margin was about 20,000, and in Pennsylvania, about 70,000. And for Clinton to win all three of those states just does not seem likely at all.
And in some states, situations are much complicated than you imagine. For example, in the state of Pennsylvania, isn't it, Mr. Moran?
Yes and no. I mean, there are some timelines that candidates that want to seek a recount must meet, and that's her challenge in Pennsylvania. But I agree with Professor Hagel, the likelihood of a recount changing the election outcome is very, very, very slim.
Then, Mr. Moran,
when you do recounts, it's...
Yeah, then, Mr. Moran,
yes?
Everybody knows this, the chance of turning the result is almost impossible. Why people are still demanding, particularly the Green Party candidate? Is it likely to further divide the country, or this is likely to teach Mr. Trump, quote unquote, a lesson, as some say?
Well, I think the Green Party candidate is doing this for publicity and because her supporters want her to do that. I don't think it's going to have any impact on the election outcome. I think it will be a somewhat divisive thing. However, you know, I'll say this. I think having a recount is not a bad thing in and of itself. We have recounts in tight races quite often. I don't think it's going to undo anything. I don't think it does any harm. It simply causes a lot of work for a number of people in boards of elections across a couple states.
But Professor Hagel, you know, the question is not necessarily whether Ms. Stein wants to have a recount, but rather why the Clinton camp agreed to participate in the recount, as she has already conceded to Mr. Trump after the election. So what can we make of this? Is this going to further help us to see what's really the inside story between these two candidates?
You know, I give the Clinton campaign a little bit of a pass on this. I know that the Trump campaign criticized Clinton's pretty strongly for joining it, calling them sore loser and so forth. But I think that to the extent that Stein was going to go forward with a recount, that pretty much any candidate would want to be part of it to make sure that it's done correctly. So in that sense, you can sort of understand why the Clinton campaign would want to be involved, just to make sure there were no problems in a recount that then created additional problems for the outcome. So in that sense, it seems understandable for her to participate, even though that she really didn't want one in the first place.
But Professor Hagel, people would be suspicious that whether you're a Democrat when you said that.
Well, they can be suspicious if they want to, but like I say, the idea is that you'd want to be part of it if it's going to happen, even if you don't want it yourself.
Mr. Moran, the question is not just with Ms. Clinton's camp, but also with what Mr. Trump, who is now already the president-elect, the remarks that he made. He's talking about a voting fraud inside the United States, especially talk about several states, New Hampshire, California, Virginia, without presenting any specific evidence for that. We have to think about the timing. I mean, earlier he was the candidate, okay? He go, you know, over the border to suggest certain things that he doesn't have evidence about. But now he is the presidential elect. There is a huge difference between these two. So what does this say now about his personality, if we could repick the word temperament?
Well, there has been a theory that people have bandied about that when Donald Trump is the president-elect and as he comes closer to being sworn in, he will become more presidential in terms of temperament. His Twitter account suggests otherwise, unfortunately. The claim he made about undocumented or illegal votes and things like this has no basis in fact. It has no support. There have been a number of academic studies, a number of Board of Elections and Secretary of State studies at the state level studying the issue, and they found very small amounts of voter fraud. It is in any election some small amount of voter fraud or voter error in any election of 5 million or 6 million people in a state, but it's tiny, infinitesimally tiny. And to suggest that there are millions of illegal votes out there, I think suggests that his temperament is not yet presidential.
Well, Mr. Moran, let me remind you what happened during the election, that all of you were wrong. That many of you, the analysts, the elites, are suggesting Mr. Trump will not have a chance, but he did. Well, are you going to be wrong again? That is the question. That when he said there are, election fraud, when he said that there are problems going on, will the majority of the American people really believe you or really believe in what Mr. Trump said, Mr. Moran?
Well, it is interesting. I mean, we've entered into the age of mass media with Twitter, with social media in elections, and I think that as everybody is adjusting. I think actually at the national level, if you go back and look, the national polls were accurate. They predicted a Hillary Clinton win in the popular vote, and that's exactly what happened. She'll end up winning by around 2%, 1.8 or something like this. They had her ahead around 4, which is just basically playing with the turnout model. I think some of the polls in the states, most of them were right, a few were off. The ones that Ohio was right, Pennsylvania was off, Wisconsin was off, Michigan was off, although some of them showed, some of those state level polls showed the race closing late. And I think that's the race. Right. They ran a good race, the Clinton team, but they lost it apparently on turnout.
Professor Hagel, what do you think? Are you guys trustworthy?
Well, You're right that a lot of prognosticators of various sorts, academics and pundits, were wrong all throughout the election, myself included. But we're talking about voter fraud and accusations of millions of votes. That's a little bit different. It's one thing to try to predict how many people are going to turn out and who they're going to vote for versus whether you've got fraudulent voting or hacking or something of that nature, where usually we need to have a little bit more evidence before making those kinds of accusations.
Right.
On the other hand, we have to remember that, and this goes to the temperament issue, that Donald Trump will say a lot of things. We can't really take him literally all the time, that when it's a situation where somebody punches at him, he'll counterpunch, and not often in a way that most people expect. He's an out-of-the-box candidate, so we really can't expect his behavior to change overnight. I'm still hopeful that, in fact, over time his temperament will change and he'll rein it back in terms of not sending out those kinds of tweets that get everybody hyperventilating about one thing or another, as he even did this morning talking about burning the flag. So we have to wait and see, but at least at this point I think I'm pretty comfortable saying that there really isn't millions, or aren't millions, of illegal votes that were cast.
I see. Having said that, though, there's one critical issue about your election system. I understand you inherited that system for 200 years. Many Americans believe it is the best system you could ever invented. But there is a popular vote, there is an electoral vote, and therefore there are differences when it comes to opinions. In American history, for example, there are 5 presidential elections where winners lost the popular vote. John Quincy Adams, 1824. Rutherford Hayes in 1876, Benjamin Harrison, 1888, George W. Bush in 2000, we all remember in Florida, everybody recount, Donald Trump, 2016. Well, what would this say? Is it likely that in every election in which electoral vote won by one and the popular vote won by the other candidate, likely to create an extremely divisive society? We all remember what happened during George W. Bush, his first term too. So what do you think, Mr. Moran?
Well, it is an interesting wrinkle in our system. I'm actually still very much a supporter of Electoral College because it forces a candidate to campaign across the country. If we ran a complete popular vote election, Donald Trump would spend quite a bit of time in Texas and some of the red states only, and Hillary Clinton would spend a lot of her time in Miami and New York and Los Angeles and Seattle. And that's not really the election you want. It also doesn't force the candidate to compete across the nation. And I think there is a strong logic to what we have in the Electoral College. But you do rightly point out that if you have a popular vote winner that is one person and an Electoral College vote winner that is another, you do get tension. Now, we haven't had that very much in our history, but we have had it recently with Republicans. And that's because, as we've said before, a Republican has a very narrow path to victory in the Electoral College. They need to piece together a number of states.
Right.
Donald Trump barely was able to do that while still losing the popular vote.
Having said that, there is one important question that would really urgently to be asked. This is coming at a time when President-elect Trump is now trying to select some of the key members of his cabinet. Secretary of State, the Defense Secretary, for example, the Treasury Secretary. What chaos and further division mean for his credibility, first of all, and also his authority in forming a future government? Professor Hagel.
It can make it more difficult, and perhaps even that's the goal to a certain extent, that people that are concerned about what Trump might do as president, if they can delegitimize him, try to undercut his authority, make it harder for him to pick a cabinet that he wants that's going to be successful, then that seems to be appropriate to try to keep him from implementing his policies, whatever they happen to be, domestic or foreign. On the other hand, it can be difficult for the country to undergo this type of chaos at a time where we like to have a relatively smooth transition of power.
Professor, Mr. Moran, Mr. Trump, the president-elect, he ran the campaign not as a typical Republican, we all understand that, but rather as a populist nationalist inside your country. So this is a critical time for him to define himself. whether he wants to go with the Republican establishment or he remain what he was, quote unquote. What do you think this issue, recount, would mean, or how it would shape his own belief and his possible political direction? Mr. Moran.
Well, I don't think the recount will impact his leadership strategy, but I do think that you're going to get a bifurcated leadership strategy, a two-track leadership strategy, where Donald Trump focuses on the big macroeconomic and national issues and is very populist, almost like a third-party candidate within the Republican Party to some extent. And Donald Trump focuses on big signature issues and then relies on his vice president to handle most other policy that is not big signature issues. Now, underneath the president and the vice president is a wide array of people, about 3,000 to 5,000 political appointees that need to be made. And you talked about the cabinet. It's very important. But what's going to happen is Donald Trump is ultimately going to end up relying on the Republican establishment quite a bit in terms of governing, and I'll explain why. He needs to rely on the Speaker of the House and the Senate Majority Leader to help him get his agenda through Congress, because he can't just make law himself. And he needs to rely on a number of Bush-era presidential appointees who are the only people he's likely to tap for many of these roles underneath cabinet secretaries. You can run against the establishment, but the establishment is the people he actually needs to run the government now.
All right. Well, we are running out of our time to discuss this, but I'm sure the topic will pop up once again. I'm already wondering when I'm going to see the two of you gentlemen once again. It seems to be very soon. Timothy Hagel, Robert Moran, really appreciate it. Thank you for being with us. That is all the time we have for today. If you'd like to see more of a program, visit our website. Just type World Insight CCTV News into your search engine or check out our YouTube channel. From me, Tian Wei, and everyone on the World Insight team, thanks for watching. And tune in again tomorrow for more insights from across China and around the world. Good night.